Good morning. Hello, my name is Joe Simpson, and again, welcome to WordCamp Santa Clarita. I am so excited for our next speaker. I had the privilege of meeting Amber Hinds as a guest at a meetup. She presented an incredible topic on accessibility, and I was so excited when she submitted a topic for our event. Amber is the CEO of Equalize Digital, a certified B Corporation and website accessibility consulting firm striving to create a world where all people have equal access to information and tools on the internet, regardless of ability. Equalize Digital is also the maker of the Accessibility Checker, a plugin that scans WordPress sites for accessibility problems and makes it easier for content managers and developers to create accessible websites. Equalize Digital is a corporate member of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals and a WordPress VIP agency. Since 2010, Amber has led teams building websites and web applications for nonprofit, K-12, and higher education institutions, government agencies, and businesses of all sizes. Please join me in welcoming Amber Hinds as she presents accessibility plugins to use or not to use. We'll see you afterwards. Make sure you ask your questions in the YouTube chat, and we'll talk more later. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Amber Hinds. I'm the CEO of Equalize Digital. We're a certified B Corporation and a WordPress VIP agency that specializes in accessibility. And today I'm going to be talking to you about accessibility plugins, whether you should be using them or not using them on your website in your quest to make it more accessible. I do want to note that I highly recommend checking out the slides. There's going to be some links in the slides. So if you want to be able to follow them and get that information, then you want to grab the slides. I also have alternative descriptions on all of my images in the slides. I'm going to do my best to describe them visually in case anyone can't see this presentation. But I do recommend grabbing the slides if you think you might benefit from the alternative text or the links that are in there. So getting started, we are going to just touch very briefly on website accessibility, what it is. I know there are a ton of accessibility presentations today, but I want to make sure that we're all starting on the same understanding of what we're talking about and why we're talking about it, just in case there's someone who's only catching this presentation and not any of the other accessibility talks. So in short, an accessible website is one that can be used by all people of all abilities and disabilities on a variety of devices. There are a lot of different assistive technology that people use when they are accessing websites. It may be that they're not on a traditional keyboard and mouse situation. They might be using a keyboard only. They might be using a screen reader. They might be using an alternative keyboard like the Darcy USB, which is a Morse code keyboard. And they might not be using a keyboard at all. They might be using eye tracking software in order to move and engage with the web. And so we really want to make sure that our website can work for everyone, regardless of what kind of device they're on. So that's a quick background about accessibility in a nutshell, very fast. But what I'm really going to be talking about is WordPress accessibility plugins. I have a screenshot up here that shows for the top 4 results that come up if you do a search for the keyword accessibility in the WordPress.org plugin directory. And I'm showing this because I want to highlight that today what I'm talking about is plugins that have a version available for free on WordPress.org. So what we're going to be talking about, the last time I looked, there were 45 plugins that came up when I did searches for the keywords of accessibility or A11Y or accessible. There's several specific types of plugins that fall in under this. So there are the fixers. These are things like overlays and toolbars, text resizers. There's a plugin that attempts to remediate something that it thinks is a problem in core WordPress, theme remediation plugins, plugin remediation, one plugin for text to speech that specifically says it's for accessibility. And then there are a second major group, which is accessible components. And then a third one, which is testing tools. So we're going to be looking at all of these. The breakdown real quick is at overlays and toolbars. There are 23 of these. This is the largest number of plugins by far on WordPress.org are overlays or toolbars. Text resizers and text-to-speech. I have a note on this slide that the text resizers, I only found 2. Text-to-speech, I found 1. There are, I am certain, way more plugins that do this where you can install it and it will add something on the front end that allows your users to resize text, for example. But the reason why I'm only counting 2 or 1 here is that these are the plugins that specifically say they are for accessibility purposes and they are tagged as accessibility and they are trying to get people to use them because of accessibility. The accessible components, I could only find 2. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then testing tools, there are 10 of these. So if you are super into data, I have a spreadsheet, which is linked off of my slides. So again, if you grab the slides, you can click on the image that is shown here. It's a screenshot. And basically what this spreadsheet has is, at the time that I recorded this talk, it has accurate numbers and counts. So it lists out the name. The name is hyperlinked over to the WordPress.org page, so you could go there and get more information. I have the number of current active installs of the plugin, how many reviews, and what its average star rating is, what type of plugin it is. And again, that's my grouping of the plugins. And then I have a column for if it has a pro version. So whether no, yes, or I've put paid only on plugins where there's a quote, free plugin on WordPress.org, but it actually has 0 functionality. It's just a plugin that allows you to connect to a premium paid service. And then there is a column that notes that whether functionality requires payment. I have a pricing column so you can see what the cost would be in order to purchase the plugin or a pro version of the plugin if you were to do that. And then I have a notes where I've added a few notes, like they're pretty short and brief about what the plugin does. So if you really want to learn more about these plugins in detail, then I recommend visiting the spreadsheet and you can check out some of the data and see some side-by-side comparisons. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about some of the major groups, some pros and cons, and whether or not we should use them. I have up on the screen right now a screenshot from one of the most common overlay or toolbar plugins on the WordPress.org directory. And so that's where I want to start, because there were 23 of them. You'll remember it was a very large number as far as the percentage of accessibility plugins and what their type is. What these plugin toolbars do is they add something on the front end of the website that allows people to control the design on the site. Some of these overlays also attempt to make fixes to the theme, plugin, or content. An example is they might try to use AI technology to see what's contained in an image and add alternative text if the alternative text is missing. Another example is they may try to identify things that it thinks are headings and that have not been tagged as headings. Let's say they're only a paragraph tag and they're bold. It may try to change the tags to a heading. So an overlay in this group sort of ranges pretty broadly from it's just a toolbar that is put on the front end of the website to something that adds that toolbar and gives those tools to users, but also tries to do some background changes to the code and the theme. So what are some pros to using one of these tools? First of all, they're easy to install. I would say generally they're somewhat easy to configure. The only reason why I say generally somewhat easy to configure, I audited a website recently where they already had skip links built into the theme, but they turned on the skip link feature in this plugin because I guess they didn't really know. And they're just like, let's turn on all the features. And so they actually had 2 different sets of skip links on their theme, which means that the plugin actually added a problem to their website because you don't need 2 sets of skip links. So I want to say that they're easy to configure, but having seen examples of this where somebody just didn't really know, and so they were like, let's turn on all the features, when they didn't actually need one of the features, and it would have been better for them to leave that feature off. I think it's hard to call anything easy, right? They can be less expensive than many consultants and developers, and 100%. If you know that you're missing skip links, we'll go with that example. If you actually don't have them and there's a plugin that can add them and they work correctly, that is 100% going to be cheaper than going directly to a developer and saying, hey, can you code skip links into my theme? So I know that that's really the appeal on these kinds of things. And that's why people think about, let's do this. I don't want to pay for an accessibility audit, or I don't want to pay for a developer to fix my problems, or even, a content person to go through my content and fix all of it. So I think that's probably the biggest pro of these tools. They can give the front end toolbar can give some less savvy users control over elements like font size or contrast that they might not have a solution for already. So super savvy people with disabilities, people who are blind, people that have had extensive vision loss for a long amount of time, they use screen readers. They know how to get on the web. They're not going to use your toolbar. However, it is possible that someone who, let's say, is getting older and starting to lose their vision, and they haven't adapted or adopted the software that could help make them more accessible just on their computer as a whole, or within their browser as a whole, they might use your toolbar. I think it's a small audience. I think the vast majority of people with disabilities already know what fixers, if you will, or what assistive technology they need to use to make websites more usable for them. But there may be some small group of users that haven't figured that out yet, and so they could utilize these tools on a website. And then there are some, as I mentioned, that can fix theme issues that are obviously detectable and resolvable in code. So for example, we mentioned the skip links. They could see every time you've added a target equals underscore blank to make a website or a link open in a new window when followed or clicked. And they could remove that and say, nope, we're going to force all links to open in the same window. They may be able to address some color contrast issues dynamically and automatically and fix the color contrast. But let's talk about the cons of overlays or toolbars. The first one is they require thorough testing to confirm that they modify all elements properly. So I have a screenshot up here of it's from a demo website where I was just playing around. So it has test content, but basically it is a email subscribe form. It has a heading. It has some bullet points with fake content. It's lorem ipsum about why you might subscribe. There is a field and a subscribe button. And this whole website has been turned into dark mode or high contrast mode with one of these accessibility plugin overlay tools. And what has happened is that this field on here has two problems. The first one is that it is missing an obvious label above it. The email address that is supposed to be entered in this field is only added with placeholder text. This is actually a problem. You have to have a visible label that stays visible even when someone starts typing into the box. So that would be considered a Web Content Accessibility Guidelines or WCAG failure. But that already existed regardless of whether I went into dark mode. But then I went into dark mode or high contrast mode, whatever this plugin called it. And the plugin did a good job of converting the heading and the bullet points and the buttons into alternative colors. However, it completely missed the placeholder text. And so as a result, you may not even be able to see the placeholder text. It is a very, very faint, it is a dark gray on a now black background. So this plugin added an accessibility problem to the website. So if you were to use some sort of plugin like this, you really thoroughly have to test and figure out in all these different modes, does it actually work, or does it cause a problem? Because it is likely that it can cause a problem if it misses things. And so to that note, one click, which is something we commonly hear used, or promises of instant accessibility. So things that say, just add this line of JavaScript and your website will be accessible in 24 to 48 hours, right? They're false promises. Many accessibility problems can be added if they don't accurately identify things, as we've talked about with this placeholder text, but many accessibility problems also cannot be fixed automatically. So to that note, the plugin here, it didn't go add a visible label above the field saying email address. And so it has completely missed that there's an accessibility problem on this field because it's missing the visible label. And then, you know, so it really, not everything can be detected by automated scanners. And so therefore not everything can be fixed by automated scanners. And that's probably the biggest con on this. But another thing that could come in is maybe you have less brand control than a custom solution. So if you wanted to have a high contrast or a dark mode version of your website, and you were to actually custom code that, then you could choose, do I want this button to be purple or do I want it to be dark blue, right? You could pick colors that match your brand aesthetic. But with a lot of these plugins where they're just out of the box, you don't have any control over that. And then a bigger probably problem as related to this is that these may cause a false sense of security. So we've had people say, well, but I have XYZ plugin on my website and it makes it accessible. Well, I think a lot of times people think I just installed this plugin and it doesn't, and that's it. But, you know, as previously mentioned, they can't fix everything. And so the biggest downside of these, and why we as an agency don't recommend them, is because I think it can mislead people into thinking that that is all they need to do with regards to accessibility. And they don't really think about the sort of ongoing practice of accessibility or the way they need to be entering their content in an accessible manner. So the biggest cons, really, even beyond what we've talked about already, we mentioned a little bit that they can cause accessibility issues if not coded properly by the developer or configured improperly on the website. And I have another screenshot here that shows the Accessibility, which is a really popular one. And this always kills me, but it's on their demo site. And the overlay here has a pink background with white text, or in some places a white or light gray background with pink text, and the pink fails color contrast. So even on their demo site, this has not been done properly. And so the plugin in and of itself could be coded wrong, and there could be accessibility problems in that plugin. And then I think the other really big con that I touched on briefly is that they force users to learn new tools instead of using the tools that they know and use daily. So if I already have something that I need to use in order to make the font size larger in my browser, then I really don't want to go to your website and have to use your tool instead. And some of these tools will disable or make it impossible to use a user's native assistive technology that they are used to using on every website. And so then it requires someone to learn something completely new in order to navigate your website and take the actions that you want them to take on the website. So that is obviously a hindrance, which could lead to increased bounce rate and reduce conversions on your side. So should you use an overlay or automated intelligence fixer? Most accessibility professionals do not recommend the use of tools that promise to make websites accessible with a single line of code. So this includes Accessibility, Userway. Userway is the one that has the most installs on WordPress.org. Accessibility is the one that you hear the most about because they're being included in a lot of lawsuits. Accessibility Enabler, Equal Web Accessibility. These are just some examples, but anything that promises to make your website accessible automatically is not recommended. If you do want to use one of these, what I would recommend is that you first read the fine print. Most of them that I have seen when I read their terms of service, they don't guarantee 100% compliance or accessibility. And they also say that you are releasing them from any liability if you get sued or if your client's website gets sued. So I really think that you need to think carefully about that. And what does that mean? And I have an example PDF linked on this slide that goes over to a lawsuit that included accessibility that was being used on the website. And it's actually really great if you're curious about seeing what one of these lawsuits looks like. Also, it has information about a really detailed report about accessibility and the problems that it could add and those sorts of things. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend checking it out. I do want to highlight two specific problems, auto-generated fixes. So any sort of tools, whether it's one of those overlays or if you find on WordPress.org something that says missing, alt text, we'll just generate it automatically for you with AI, right? So existing tools that generate alt text for images or captions is another one. They frequently include errors that make them unusable for the audience they're trying to help. And I have two examples. The first one is there's a screenshot up that shows two side-by-side images of videos from Meryl Evans. She is a deaf woman who does a lot of videos and speaking about captionings. And she has a great example. There's a link on the side over to a full blog post where she talks about it, where she shows side-by-side actual captions that she has written herself for the video that she has made compared to the auto-generated captions that a tool like YouTube's auto-generated captions put on there. And there is a significant difference in the accuracy of those captions. So you really, if you're going to put captions on your videos, you need to do it manually, or you can auto-generate them and then fix them and use that as a starting point, but you can't just leave that. And the thing I always tell our clients too is you wouldn't publish your about page with spelling errors or typos on it. So you don't want to put captions on the web that have spelling errors or typos, right? This is a reflection of your brand. And another example of why these auto-generated fixes don't work. So this shows a image of a woman in a white lace dress with 3/4 length sleeves, and she is standing outside. There's green grass and trees in the background, and it's actually a screenshot from a website that is an e-commerce store, and we can see the product name says Bella Lace Wedding Dress below the image and the price of US $198. So this is an e-commerce store. This is probably the archive for that e-commerce store. And then you would click on the image or click on Bella Lace Wedding Dress and go to the product page where you could then purchase or add it to your cart. This image was missing alt text, and Accessibility looked at this image and it generated the alt text of grass, nature, and summer. Obviously, they're not selling grass or nature or summer. So that is not a helpful alternative text. The alternative text here really needs, it doesn't even need to mention that the model is outside because it's not relevant to the purchaser or the purchaser decision of, should I go get more information about this dress, right? So really the alternative text on this image should say something like a 3/4 length lace dress, wedding dress, or something that describes the product, right? Knee length, A-line skirt, whatever that might be, so that people then are saying, oh, okay, I want to learn more about it, and maybe then purchase it if they can't see the image. So this is another example of where the auto-generated alternative text, it just fails, and it's something that a human being really does have to create. So the next set of plugins that fall under the fixer group is general theme remediation. I sometimes see this built into those overlay tools, but they can also be standalone. So a popular example to this is WP Accessibility, which is a plugin developed by a core WordPress contributor and a member of the accessibility team. So he super knows accessibility and he's embedded in it on a daily basis. Generally, this is a recommended plugin. I think that the pro side of using a plugin like this is it's built specifically for WordPress by someone who deeply understands how WordPress works. And so it's more likely to be accurate than a non-WordPress specific fixing tool, you know, like one of the external overlays that wasn't necessarily built for WordPress. I think this plugin, which it does things like it can add skip links, it can add focus states if you don't have them. I think theoretically something like this should work universally, but as I mentioned, they require testing. You need to really test to make sure that it does it. And then a note on these is even this plugin, it doesn't fix everything. You still need to do automated and manual testing and make manual fixes to the other items that it can't resolve or can't even identify. So what about text resizing and contrast toggles? A lot of people ask about this. There's a screenshot up here that shows whitehouse.gov, which is something that when it launched earlier this year, everybody was super excited about the accessibility side of it. And a lot of people discussed the contrast toggle and the text size toggle on that website. On that website, it's not using plugin. It is actually custom coded for the website. In order to really ensure that it accurately touches everything and does a good job. If you do want to use one of these, I think ideally you want to choose a tool that only has this functionality, or you want to custom code it. You want to test it on every post type, archive page, plugin pages, etc. Any different page to ensure that it's not missing anything. And then you need to make sure that it's keyboard and screen reader accessible. So having them floating there on the left-hand side doesn't do much if somebody who can't use a mouse can't reach them and turn them on or off. So these could be things that might help in some situations. I did reach out to the agency who built whitehouse.gov and asked them if they had any data on how frequently this was used. And they said they did not, which is kind of a bummer because honestly, you know, I'm in the camp of, as I mentioned before, most people have assistive technology. They know how to invert colors or make the font size bigger if they want to. So if anybody out there has any data on usage for these things, I would love to see it. But as of right now, like, we don't typically do this for our client websites. But if you do want to do it, I think there's ways that it can be done well. And this is a great example of doing it well. So the next group is text to speech. So this is something, this was one plugin that specifically said it was for accessibility. And I think the idea is sort of interesting, right? They're giving the ability for someone to listen to a page or a post rather than having to read it. But what I want to note, if you choose this, and I will say this specific plugin, I went over to the demo site and I tested it and it wasn't keyboard accessible. I could not reach the play button that it embedded in a post with my keyboard only. So therefore, again, this is an example of something that said that it's helping with accessibility, but it actually caused accessibility problems. So you really do need to thoroughly test these. If you do want to use something like this, you need to make sure that the tool can be keyboard accessible. It needs to be able to be stopped or easily turned off. So if they start it from playing, that it needs to then stop reading out the text when they want it to. Special considerations might be required for placement, choosing which voice you use, what accent should the person have, because there's a lot of different voices and accents available for reading out text. A thought might be, if you really think, hey, I want all of my blog posts to have an audio, is would it be better for you to just read them and record it so that it gets the natural inflection of your voice at different points in time, rather than having, you know, the Siri or the Amazon Alexa voice reading out and not really understanding the connotations or the tone that was intended by the words on the page. So those are things to think about if you're considering doing text to speech. Then within the fixer group, there are a handful of plugins that target a specific theme or a specific plugin and try to resolve issues in that specific theme or specific plugin. So some examples of this is there's a plugin that's for Contact Form 7 that gives you accessible defaults on that. There's a plugin called WCAG 2.0 Form Fields for Gravity Forms, which added a lot of accessibility fixes to older versions of Gravity Forms. They've since improved, but this is an example of one that it specifically makes it on that form plugin. There was a plugin for Genesis Accessible for the Genesis child themes. These are some examples. Generally, I would say plugins like this are probably a good option because they're targeted and more likely to be accurate. You need to make sure that they're maintained or the fixes may no longer work. Another thing to sort of watch if you install one of these is a great example is the Gravity Forms. So there was this plugin that did fixes for Gravity Forms, but now Gravity Forms has released a lot of fixes. So you might want to do some testing and say, hey, do I actually need this third-party plugin anymore? Or is the plugin that I was trying to remediate now accessible and I can remove this other thing that is now unnecessary or might be like butting heads with it because it's causing duplicate issues. So these are generally a good idea because they're really targeted and they're trying to fix a specific problem. You just kind of need to watch them and evaluate over time if they're still needed or if they're still doing what they're supposed to do. Then there's a set of plugins, and I was really hoping to find more than these. I think I found just 3 or 4 of these, but these are accessible components. So these are plugins that add blocks or widgets or short codes that then embed something to your website, and the specific item is accessible in comparison to other alternatives that don't. So the best example that I have is the Able Player for WordPress plugin, which is a alternative media embedder that includes support for captions in a variety of different languages. It includes transcripts, which can highlight or not highlight. People can change the language on the transcripts. If you add those in, it can do all kinds of different things. It can speed up or slow down the playback of the video. And that's what the screenshot here shows. So this is an example of, this is a thing that you could add to your website as an alternative to maybe what's already there for embedding YouTube videos. And you could use this player instead to make your videos more accessible. Now, the next group of plugins that I'm going to talk about are accessibility testing plugins. These are plugins that run automated scans on your website, and they flag possible problems for review and manual fixes. I am keeping these separate from any plugins that actually make the fixes. So those were all covered in our overlay toolbar kind of section. These are plugins that are purely for testing purposes and trying to identify accessibility errors. So what are some pros to accessibility testing plugins? The first is that they can speed up identification of obvious errors in bulk, and they can rapidly provide a full site assessment. So if you have a plugin or a testing tool that can scan your entire website, then you could get a feel on all 500 pages, how many images are missing, for example. Whereas if you use a tool like Wave or even Axe, which is an awesome testing tool from DQ, you have to really do one page at a time, right? It doesn't do that whole we scan in bulk. So that's why a plugin like this is useful. They can be useful in addition to new project testing process. So if you have a normal process for going through your workflow, and when you get into test and debug before you launch any website, this could be something that could be added in sort of modularly, and then you can start to work on including accessibility into those projects. Some of these have alerts on the post or page edit screen, which can tell content editors if there are problems on the page and provide opportunities for them to correct the problems before publishing the content. So this is huge, right? Instead of thinking about it as a reactive, okay, now there's a problem, I have to go fix it. It's almost a proactive, which is you started writing your content, and before you even publish it live to the website and before any user encounters this content, let's see that there are problems and let's solve them. They can provide learning opportunities to teach users about accessibility. Again, I think a good parallel is kind of like the Yoast plugin, and it's got all those checklists of items, right, for SEO. And you might not have been very familiar with SEO, but you start using Yoast enough that you start to get a feel for, okay, these are the things I have to do. And eventually you just do it. Well, it's the same sort of thing. If you've got one of those accessibility testing plugins on the poster page, edit screen, you see those things as you're building your page, then you're like, okay, over time, you learn more about accessibility. And then most of the WordPress plugins are incredibly more cost effective than other bulk scanning tools. So there are SaaSes outside of WordPress. For example, PopeTech, which uses the Wave API, Moncito, and SiteImprove that do bulk scanning for accessibility. But these products are, I want to say like 20 times, not even kidding, 20 times more expensive than the WordPress bulk plugin version. I think, you know, you're paying per page or per scan, either with API credits or, you know, you get some set amount, but usually they start in the multiple thousands of dollars per year if you're using an outside of WordPress tool. So that is a huge pro for choosing one of the WordPress plugins. And then accessibility testing cons. Depending upon the tool, only 30 to 50% of accessibility problems can be identified automatically. So manual keyboard and screen reader testing is still required. So it is really important to keep this in mind. And we tell people this all the time. Our testing tool can help you identify some of the most obvious problems, but it will not tell you if your website is accessible. And we have a note that says, we don't ever tell you 100% accessible. We tell you if you've passed all of our tests, but we do not tell you 100% accessible because not every problem can be detected by an automated tool. And that is something that is really important, whether you know. Some scanners could be less accurate than a front-end scan, depending upon how they do it. If you have JavaScript that comes in and loads at the last minute and it changes the content on the page, it's possible that some scanners that are scanning from the back end through WordPress are not going to see that. They're only going to get the content or things before the JavaScript modification. And so that is something to be aware of. You could provide content editors with a false idea about how accessible their website is. So again, if you have a plugin, especially if you have a content editor that doesn't know, and you're handing a website off to the client and they're seeing the, you know, this is what's that, I passed all the tests, or some of them might even say 100% accessible. And so again, it's like a total false idea about what it is. And that, you know, is definitely a downside of these plugins. And then another potential one is it could be overwhelming if there are issues that are identified that a user does not know how to fix. And you can go get a full report of every error that was found on your website. And let's say, even on a smaller website that has 50 pages, or, you know, let's say, you know, 10, think about it this way, 10 pages and 10 team member bio pages and like 5 service pages and a handful of blog posts, right? Like that's not a huge website, but if there are problems on all of those pages, you can run a scan and you can come back with thousands of errors or warnings. And I think people can see that and get overwhelmed. And it's possible that if they don't have a good plan for like, how do I go through this? How do I assess it? How do I fix things? That they might just give up. And that is a con that I am aware of with our tool. And I think other tools like this. And it's something we're trying to figure out, you know, how can we assess this? But it is, I think if you're deciding whether or not to put this on, like that is something you need to be aware of. So things that you should consider if you're choosing an accessibility plugin. I know I've talked a lot about like different pros and cons of all of these different types of plugins, but these are some general things no matter what kind of plugin you're choosing. First of all, you want to think about the cost versus included features. You want to think about what do recommended accessibility professionals say about it. You want to think about how will the plugin impact your website visitors? Will it change the front end experience at all? Will it be positive or negative, or is it only a back end modification? You know, in the example of a testing plugin, it doesn't change the front end at all. The overlays change the front end. So you really need to think about that. What is the user experience going to be like? And then think about how will the plugin fit into your development and content creation processes? Will it make accessibility requirements more understandable for you or easier to achieve? Or will it potentially cause a problem? So you really want to think about all of these things. And then once you've decided that you're going to use a plugin, you have to sort of think about how to test them. So there's a couple of different ways to go about it. If it is a front-end plugin or something that you expect to impact the front end of your website, then sometimes testing the demo page is sufficient. Other times you may need to install it on a test version of your website and play around with it and see what does it do? How does it actually impact the front end? You want to tab through and ensure you can access it and use it with a keyboard only and no mouse, and you need to have no loss of focus. So there needs to be a clear focus indicator, which is typically a line around all of the elements. So you want to make sure that it's fully functional in that way. And then you want to use a screen reader to confirm that it has appropriate labels and it makes sense. I would potentially run Wave or Axe or a testing plugin on it just to make sure that nothing is being flagged by those tools. And that can help you to identify any problems that might exist in the plugin and whether or not it's going to add those problems onto your website if you install it. And then with regards to testing plugins, I think you want to compare results to Wave or Axe, but you want to sort of recognize that results will not be identical. And just sort of note the differences, but that might help you to know, like, what is the plugin testing for? What is it not testing for? How accurate are its results? Again, like I even see differences between Wave and Axe, which are the two most commonly used browser-based testing tools, where I can run a scan on the same page and get totally different results. So with testing tools, it's hard to just say, oh, this one does more, or is more accurate or whatever. I think we typically recommend like use 2 or something like that, right? So you get a variety of feedback from different testing tools. So that is my presentation. I really appreciate that you sat here. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I also just want to throw out a really quick shout out to, we recently started a WordPress accessibility meetup, which is 100% virtual, and it will always be virtual. We're meeting one morning and one evening per month to try and make it work globally for people around the world. And you can find us on WordPress Accessibility Meetup on meetup.com. And I hope you'll join. If you want to learn more about accessibility, you can reach out to me through the Meetup, or you can contact me through our website, which is equalizedigital.com.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. I saw there was lots of questions in the chat that you were interacting with, which is great. So I'm going to recap some of them to toss them out so that we can record them for posterity's sake. How's that?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right. Thank you so much. One question is, I may have missed it, but does your plugin have a free and premium version? If so, what are the differences?
Okay, yeah, I didn't actually name my plugin in the talk because I was trying not to be promotional, but our tool is called Accessibility Checker. It's listed on the spreadsheet that I mentioned at the beginning, and there's other accessibility testing tools that you can check out listed in that spreadsheet too. And ours does have a free version and a premium version, and the free version is on WordPress.org. So, yeah.
Awesome.
I can go more into it, but I don't, I'm not here to sales pitch anybody, so.
Well, of course not. I mean, I just thought it'd be good to share it with you. I know you mentioned your meetup as well, so that's another way that folks can get more information and learn about accessibility. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the meetup is fun because it's not just me. So I did our first one, but our next 4 to 6 speakers are not me, which is great because part of my goal with starting the meetup was there's not a lot of people that specialize in accessibility in my local area. And I wanted to be able to like learn from other people. So if you're interested, we're going to have lots of cool speakers and everything. So
I know, and I think I'm hoping to be one of them. So
yes, I hope so.
All right. So Ron is asking. Ron is a local member here in the Santa Clarita area and from North Hollywood. He asks, how did you become so focused on accessibility in WordPress design and development? Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, so I started working on accessibility in 2016, and it was a little bit of a trial by fire. My agency got hired to build a website for Colorado State University. And it was right around the time that the university was trying to figure out what their accessibility protocol was going to look like in order to be better compliant with Section 508, because they're federally funded. And so I got hired. I had never done anything with accessibility, but it worked out because they were just starting their accessibility initiative at the university and really trying to figure that out. So we were able to work together. So that's when I started to learn about it. And we do a lot of work for Colorado State University still, like building different college or department websites. And so that's really where it started and what inspired me. And then through that, we developed a partnership. Through our accessibility work, we ended up developing a partnership with Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which is in Austin, which is where I'm located, just north of Austin. And I think I really got interested in how important it was. With some of the students, we would hire the students to screen reader test our websites, and just talking to them and learning about their experience and hearing some of the struggles that they have on different websites. And it really, for me, I was like, wow, how have I not heard of this before? It was crazy to me that I'd been building websites since 2010, and I had never, for 6 years, and I'd never even thought about it or realized it, which I think was a weakness. And so I think for me, that's really what inspired me to get out. And I do a lot of speaking because I'm trying to help other developers learn more about it, because it is so important. And I think some people just don't even realize.
Yeah, and Austin is a hotbed. I know Nobility's there, and that's on the campus of UT. So it's sort of like the mecca of accessibility. Another question, and this sort of dovetails into what you mentioned as learning about accessibility as a developer. Mm-hmm. What inspired you to do the plugin, and what was the biggest challenge you experienced while building that plugin for accessibility?
Yeah, so the motivation behind the plugin actually was sort of inspired by our Colorado State clients, because we would launch the website, we would know that it was accessible at the time that we launched. And then typically in those projects, we're creating the website, but they're managing all of their own content on an ongoing basis. And so we would sort of over time watch it become less accessible when they would forget alt tags or they wouldn't use headings in the right order. And we did training for them, and I would give them this big PDF checklist. Every time you write a new blog post or you edit something, here's your checklist, right, of things you have to look for. But the checklist is hard because you have to have it open on your desktop or print it out or whatever that might be. And I kept saying, I was like, we really need something on the post edit screen. And I gave the parallel of Yoast, right? It scans the content and it gives you sort of a happy face or a sad face or whatever for SEO. And I was like, we need something like that for accessibility. And we kind of looked around and we saw that there were some, and we tested them out to see, can we just use these with our clients? And then I was just ultimately, I was like, no, I really feel like there's more that could be done than some of those other ones. And then there's SaaS options, like Site Improve or Moncito are two popular ones, but they're very, very expensive, and you're paying per page scan, which a lot of our clients they don't have the budgets for that. And so that was the motivation behind building it, which is mostly trying to solve a problem for our clients and for ourselves.
And to me, that's what's great about the WordPress community. It's like someone comes up with an idea, like, hey, no one's doing this, or I could do it better. And then you just go out and build it. So that's so awesome that you developed this and contributed to the community. So thanks again. Let me see here.
Do you want me to answer the hardest part about it?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I will say, and maybe other plugin developers will feel this, but I think the hardest thing for us, of course, is we want it to be as accurate as possible, and we want to try and catch as many problems as possible. But as I mentioned in the talk, and other people have mentioned in their talks, automated scans can't. So I think we're constantly iterating on we call them rules that we use, that we check against. and trying to figure out how can we improve them. But the biggest problem for us is color contrast. It is the hardest to check against. And I think that's going to be an ongoing thing. And eventually at some point, we're hoping to actually have front end scanning, which might be a little bit more accurate because it'll catch any JavaScript changes that happen after the page loads. But I feel like that's the biggest challenge, probably anyone who has a testing tool is like, how can I make this actually accurate, less false positives, more correct positives, those kinds of things.
Well, and I know we're sort of running out of time, and I'll sort of finish on this because this has got my mind going. When you develop a plugin, what's sort of your roadmap going forward? I know you mentioned a few of those things that you want to iterate on and improve your plugin. What are some short-term goals you have for the plugin, or what do you see for the plugin moving forward?
Actually, one of our biggest short-term goals for the plugin in the next couple of months is we're actually going to add the ability to log manual issues in the plugin, so that if somebody were to have an accessibility tester come in, whether it's a professional or a user tester, and test the website, that they could log those issues and they would show up sort of in the same on the page or post edit screen. And that really is another thing. It's solving our problem, which is we hand people these big reports when we do manual audits of websites. And I'm like, I want it in the dashboard so they can go to the page, see, here's all the things I have to fix on this page, both the automated and the manual. So that's our thing that's going to come relatively soon. And then longer term, I think we want to be able to do more maybe PDF report generation or some guided testing, like DQs, guided testing. If you play with that in Axe, I'm like, I would love to build that out for ours, but that's a whole nother experience.
Of course. Awesome. But thanks again for the great presentation. And if folks want to ask you more questions, we have a Zoom room, so stop on over there if you have more questions for Amber. Coming up next is, in the Sky Tower track, is Taylor Arndt with the importance of WordPress backend accessibility at 11 a.m. UTC -7. Also, thank to all the monitors in this channel and on all channels during WordCamp Santa Clarita. Without your help, it wouldn't be possible. So a special shout out to Lynn Nashihara and Larry Hollywood. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Bye.